In today's episode, I talk about next level pens and what pens aren't available, but really should be. What's up, everybody? Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is episode number 162 of Goulet Q&A. And it's been an interesting week. Coming up here today, actually by the time this will have published, this will already probably be past, but we have physical inventory for Friday. It's always kind of a big deal. If you get our Goulet newsletter, the Goulet Communique, you'll see I talked about that in the personal message, just specifically why we do it. If you've ever worked in the retail business, you know doing inventory is always a big deal, but we shut down the site for a couple hours. You're not able to buy anything, but we count everything that's on our shelves, and it's always a big effort for us to do that team-wide. So that's an initiative that we got going on. It was looking like it was going to get kind of hairy for us because we were going to have some major releases coming out, specifically the TWSBI VAC 700R, Game of Thrones, and the Lamy Safari Petrol. Originally, we thought were all going to be coming on that day, on Friday, today, when this is publishing. That ended up getting pushed out. So we're expecting basically all of those for next week. So be ready for those. It's kind of cool. Usually the Lamy, you know, is a little bit later, but it happens to be coming kind of like first week of April here. So that's pretty cool. So sign up for the email notification list on any of those three if you're interested in those. You know, I think we're gonna have a good supply of the Lamy. I'm not worried about running out of those. Game of Thrones, I think, will be just fine too, especially because it's a higher price point, a little less impulsive of a purchase. The TWSBIs, I think we're going to run out fairly quickly because we've been out of VAC 700s since September. The wait list is unreal for that one, but it's also been such a long time. It's hard to know how many people that are on that email notification list are really going to kind of pull through on that. So, but I know we're getting only a limited stock of those at the onset. We should get follow-up orders of that, but it's going to be a little bit limited. It's kind of out of our hands. It's just what was allocated to us. So just kind of be ready for that. Be ready to pull the trigger on the VAC 700Rs as soon as you get the email notification, or you can just wait a little bit and get them. But that's going on. Just on the personal front, I've got something really exciting coming up this weekend. I'm attending something called the Butterfly Ball with my daughter. It's a daddy-daughter dance, basically. So I will be dressing up in a full suit to the nines, I think is the phrase. I'll be going all out, and my daughter will, I mean, she pretty much dresses up like she's going to a butterfly ball every day, but she's got a special outfit picked out, wants to look like a Cinderella, so she's got a Cinderella type dress-up thing picked out with some butterfly wings and stick-on earrings and the whole deal. She's definitely a girly girl, so should be probably the most adorable thing I've ever participated in my life, so I'm pretty pumped for that. So if I throw a picture up on Instagram, you may see that coming out tomorrow. But back on the pen front here, we're excited this week to launch the seasonal Edison Nouveau Premier. It's our 14th one, and it is sea glass. So it's kind of somewhat similar. I don't know if you remember the water lily that we did. A little bit of a similar vibe, but it's kind of different. I wanted to show you both together just so you get the vibe that's different. It's a more intense kind of greenish blue instead of more of a blue, and the pink is more of a coral color, not a hot pink like this one. And then it's got some light blue in here too, some darker black swirls. So while the two are somewhat similar in essence, this was from last year, the spring edition from last year, I did want to point out the differences there. So this is really cool. Sarah did a great job taking some pictures down in Florida, actually. So she happened to be traveling anyway and was able to take them on location. So that was pretty sweet to work that out. So, you know, extra fine through 1.5 nib sizes on that one, and they're available right now. They've been pretty popular so far, so I'm pumped for that. Unfortunately, we had a big lapse in Edison Nouveau Premiers. the seasonal ones anyway, because the last one that we had, the winter, the ebonite one, we ran out crazy short, and then Edison was actually moving their facility, so they were not able. Normally we would have restocked and ordered more. They sold out quicker than we thought, and then we were not able to restock just because of everything they had going on. So we've actually had a couple of months with no seasonal premiere, so we're pumped to have this back. We got a pretty good stock of them, so we think we should see them around for a little bit. And then we also had the Aurora 88 blue. This is the limited edition with the flex nib on it. So that I'm excited to see finally come in. Very limited quantities, only 188 worldwide, and I kept one for myself. So, that's they came and went. It was about 24 hours and they were gone. So a lot of people were interested in them, and I know that it's something that a lot of you were probably interested in, but it's seriously just super limited. So the next ones are going to be coming out are the red ones. So we still have that up on our site. We took the blue one down because it's like we don't want people signing up for email notification lists and stuff because it's not available anymore. But the red one is still available. Same pen, piston fill, 14 karat flex nib. So we'll have a little bit more on that. We'll have a slice coming out. I talked about it in Q&A last week. We'll have a slice coming out on that so you can see at least how the flex works if you're interested in any of the future colors. But they'll be coming out with colors like pretty much on a monthly basis for these limited editions. So, let them get out in people's hands, see the buzz, see what the general sentiment is, and then see if it's something that you dig, and then you can pick out a future color. And then just, some epic stuff that's coming next week. And that pretty much catches you up to speed. Let's jump right into the questions, shall we? Starting out with pen writing questions. This is from Ulises R on Facebook. Says, what's the next level after stepping up from the Metropolitan or All-Star to the Vanishing Point or Lamy 2000? Which pens are the next step from these? So that next level that I alluded to in my intro. Yes, so I think there's a law of diminishing returns. I just kind of want to get right off the bat. So those of you who aren't familiar, it's a curve like this. So as you spend just a little bit more in price, it jumps a lot up in quality and stuff like that in the very low end range. Once you get more and more expensive, the amount of difference of what you're getting for what you're paying for is diminished. Hence the law of diminishing returns. So once you hit that kind of gold nib level, you're talking about the Vanishing Point, the Lamy 2000, there's a lot of pens that are in that nice like $140 to $175 range. Really a lot of solid gold nibs there that are really good writers. Once you get beyond that, it's not like spending an additional $100 will have a same impact that will go. You get some different things, but you really need to get more up into the $400, $500, $700,000 range to see some significant jumps in quality or just appeal, and it gets more varied too, because the nuances of what make these pens different and worth that much money, it gets more and more niche, as with anything that's high end, right? The more expensive you get, the less it's going to appeal to a mass market. So if you even consider fountain pens a mass market at all. So I think, most gold nibs, and this is a generalization, but most gold nibs will pretty much hit a plateau. For example, if you have, a Pilot Custom 74, that's the same nib that's used on the Namiki Yukari, which is, a $2,800 pen. Same nib though. I mean, okay, the engraving on the nib is Namiki instead of Pilot, but same thing. So in terms of actually writing better, once you kind of hit a certain point, you're not really going much beyond that, if at all. You may get into some, if you get into limited edition stuff, you might have nib designs that are different, or, certainly you can get into some different nibs. Like if you get into the Namiki Emperors, you can get those huge nibs that they have on there. If that's your thing, that's cool, but you're taking a jump there. But even still, that's not going to necessarily significantly better. But any like, the Pelican M1000, okay, it's got a very large nib, very soft. That is a jump, I feel, from the Pelican M800, which has still a large nib, but a slightly smaller nib than the M1000. So that's part of what you're paying for with that jump. But that's not always the case with these pens. A lot of them, once you get to kind of that gold nib level, I'm thinking specifically like Aurora, a lot of these other brands where they have kind of like a standard gold nib, or like Visconti with their Palladium nib. The Palladium Dream Touch nib they have on their $500 to $600 pens are the same nib that they have on their $4,000 pens. So you're gonna hit a cap there in terms of how it writes. It's gonna be other aspects of the pens that are a lot more appealing at that point. So when you're talking about that next level, it's not just the writability of it, it's a lot of other intangibles or maybe tangibles that will make the difference for you in terms of what next level means to you. You get into kind of fancier or more precious materials that are used, things like celluloids, ebonites, volcano, copper, other crazier things like that. A lot more embellishments and ornamentation that you get on the trim, certain things like that. You get into, possibly vintage or rare materials, especially if you get into kind of custom-made things. You can get into stuff that's made out of that. Unique filling mechanisms could be some, especially you get into like pistons and vacuums and other kind of cool things like that, or other elaborate things. That could be in there as well. Enhanced build quality, just in general. Some of it is noticeable. Some of it is a little less noticeable. For example, you end up dealing with, for example, the Pelicans, like the M800 has a lot of internal like metal components instead of having some that are plastic on like the 4 and 600. So, it's going to add some weight to it, but it's also going to be a durability factor and stuff like that. So things like that might not necessarily be as, outwardly noticeable, you're going to see some of that as you go up in price. Nicer plating on the trim and stuff like that. I'm thinking specifically like Graph-on faber-castell, instead of having like, chrome plating or rhodium plating on some of their designer series and maybe even some of their entry-level Graph-on series, you get into platinum plating and some stuff like that. So even in things like that, it's like, or you might have rose gold trim and instead of just gold, so it's like you get into some of that other kind of stuff. Sterling silver accents instead of rhodium. It doesn't necessarily look worlds different. It's not like black trim versus silver trim, but the trim itself, I'm thinking like the Monograppa Passion, it's a celluloid pen with sterling silver trim. It looks like it could be mimicked by a blue acrylic with rhodium plated trim, but it's not. It's got the more precious materials in there. So that you kind of get into the next level stuff. More just like design and artistry. Usually when you're dealing with higher end stuff, it's not as mass produced, so you're dealing with smaller batches. It gives a little more freedom to the manufacturer to, design some different themes, some more, intentional designs and stuff like that. They spend a little more time, a little more R&D on it. So you might get into some of that. You might get into some limited edition stuff. It might be numbered, maybe a more collectible kind of thing, maybe perhaps an investment value related to it. Though I never really tout pens as a financial investment, like just turning pens for profit. I think that shouldn't be your primary motive. And just nicer presentation too, more ornamental boxes, larger boxes, pens that come with a bottle of ink and just other things like that too, signed cards and stuff like that can be in there. So I think, quickly you'll jump up into kind of that $500 to $800 range, getting to that next level. So whereas going from the initial levels like, preppies and Metropolitans and stuff like that, then you're getting up into like All-Stars and, the Monteverdi Vincias and, things that are in kind of that like $40 to $80 range. Then you get up to the, the gold nibs like you mentioned here. From there, it's like, whew, sky's kind of the limit. It's not really like, I think that once you get kind of out of that initial gold nib level, the like, $150 to $200 range, like what you mentioned here, the VP and the Lamy 2000, once you kind of get out of that, once you're kind of spending more than $200 on a pen, what's 500? You know what I mean? Like seriously, I mean, yes, obviously money is got to be done intentionally, but like really once you're kind of in that space, you're into some pretty discretionary money that you're probably spending on your pens. So you're not nickel and diming so much individual pens one against the other. If you're comparing two pens, if you're looking like, oh, I'm looking at a Monograppa Passion versus a Visconti Homo Sapiens, one of them being $20 cheaper or more expensive than the other is really not going to factor into your decision very much, I would argue. So I think it becomes, the range becomes much wider once you get above that point. So some good ones that I have to actually answer your question, some good ones that I have thought of that would be really good to point out as some next levels. And again, this next level expands up quite a bit, really up to kind of $1,000. So you can interpret whether next levels really goes that high or not. That's totally up to you. I'll start off, I think Visconti is definitely a significant jump, but definitely up there and worthy of consideration. The Homo sapiens is hands down one of the ones that I would point to the first. This is my current daily carry at the moment with a fine nib. Getting into Visconti too, some other like kind of staples in their line. The Divina as well is up there. This is pushing $1,000, but is up there. And then they have other pens like the Opera, not necessarily a regularly available one, but kind of a staple in their line as well. So that's kind of some of the higher end stuff. I think if you get into Aurora is one that I would consider, the 88 or the Optima as well. The 88, there's a lot of different versions of it. We haven't carried it regularly here until now, basically with the Flex nib coming out, and then they have the Nebulosa, which is the purple, first purple they've done. That's a limited edition as well, so it's a little bit more expensive than the Optima normally is. Rose gold trim, you know, gold nib, piston fill, all that good stuff. Not the same, not a flexible nib on the Nebulosa though, but still a beautiful pen. So I just kind of wanted to show it off a little bit. These are some good ones. These are in like the more like 450 on up to 700-ish for the Nebulosa. I think Monograppa, you know, you get into the Copper Mule. Now this one's still a steel nib pen, gets up there in price a little bit, but just the build quality of this one and the copper, and it patinas, and it looks really awesome. So that is a good one I would recommend. And then getting into Passion, which I mentioned a second ago, celluloid, sterling silver, all that good stuff. Nice writing gold nib, just really writes well, polishes up beautifully. I love this pen. I think I have to mention Mont Blanc just because it's very worthy pens. They're definitely, you're paying a premium for the name and stuff like that, and I don't sell these pens, but certainly worth a nod to them. I got a 146 and a 149 here. These are pushing the upper range a little bit too, but both worthy pens, you know, piston filling, gold nibs, all that good stuff. Certainly worth taking a look at. You get into some Delta. The Dolce Vita, I think, is worth mentioning because that's been a staple in their line for 15 years. I have two different versions here. There's a bunch of different sizes they have. This is the mini one and this is the oversize. So I just wanted to show how different in size the two were, especially when you look at like the cap and the grip and the nib too. Is just really kind of funny. Like, whee! It's kind of funny. You can actually fit like the whole body of the pen of the mini inside the cap of the oversize. So kind of interesting there. But those are kind of staple next level pens. This one is definitely on the more affordable end of the range here, the Platinum 3776. Why did I show this one? I think I'm showing this one later actually. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sorry. That was a spoiler alert for a question I'm going to answer in the coming up Q&A. I just grabbed it and got excited. That would I would consider more in like the next level like you had with the Vanishing Point and all that. But then if you really want to get up there, I think I've got the Namiki Yukari. This is the Moonlight version. But there's definitely a lot of different Yukaris that are around. The Moonlight's on the upper end of the price spectrum, but you can get into the Nippon Art, you know, which is in like the $700-ish range, and then you can get on up into the Yukaris, which get into the $1,200-$1,500 up on the $2,800 or so for that. So that gets up there. And then the Waterman Careen, I think, is worth mentioning too. I actually have one of these, so I wanted to show it. There's different versions of this one. Haven't done a lot with Waterman, but I do have this pen. It's a really nice pen, gold nib, all that good stuff. I have some other ones that I'll mention that I don't have to show, but are, I think, worth taking a look at. The Pelican Souvron series, so the M400, 600, 800, 1000, I talked about them briefly, but kind of any of the pens in that range, they vary in price quite a bit, between like $400 to $1,000 price, depending on versions and sizes and stuff like that you get, but they'll definitely be in there. Graphon Faber-Castell, they get into like several hundred on it to multi-hundred. What's the difference there? I don't know, but the classic Temiccio, the Anello, those are all, you know, if you look on our site, we've recently started carrying Graphon Faber-Castell. Looking at some of those, that would be in that range. Caran d'Ache is another brand. I'm not intimately familiar with a lot of their pen line, but definitely in terms of, you know, build quality and stuff like that, they're up there. So the Caran d'Ache pens. Stipula, their Etruria, that's the one that, we got the Etruria Prisma that should be coming at some point. I don't know exactly when it's coming. I'm waiting for it. Got a bunch of people on the list for that one. but that's the rainbow looking demonstrator. So I'm pumped to see that one in person. I'm probably going to set one of those aside for myself. We'll see. But the Stipula Etruria is definitely kind of a staple higher end pen there. And the Parker Duofold, I think, is kind of comparable to the Carine. Different pen, but comparable, very kind of staple pen. That one is a nice writer as well. So I think any of those pens in that vein, there's a lot more here that I haven't mentioned, of course, that could certainly be talked about in here. But I think that gives you a pretty good spread, pretty good idea of what you could look into. All right, this next question is from Bercolini on Instagram. You often mention fountain pens working by capillary action. What does that actually mean? Okay, so I've covered this in Fountain Pen 101, but I thought it was worth a nod to it here since Fountain Pen 101 is many years old now, and I was a lot heavier when I made those videos. I don't want to sidestep the question, but I just want to give a mention if you want to learn more in depth. The Wikipedia article about capillary action is actually pretty thorough, so I will just mention that. And they actually have a line in there buried somewhere that says, fountain pens work by capillary action. So kind of legitimizes it a little bit. Capillary action, by my definition and all my scientific wisdom, it's when a liquid is able to flow through a restricted space without being assisted by gravity. That's kind of how I think about it. So, if you think about water, okay, if it's running down a hill or something like that, it's just flowing because of gravity. But if you restrict it into a small enough space, it'll actually run on its own. I don't know if it's a surface tension or whatever, but the term for that is called capillary action. It's the same way that root systems in trees work, because there's no like tree muscle that's flexing to to get the water up there. It has very constricted root system that allows the water to naturally work its way actually up against gravity to go up the tree to feed the whole tree. So that's how that works, is capillary action. And that's the same way that fountain pens work. If you look at any fountain pen, the way that they are designed is they have a bead system. I'm going to try and find you one that I can take apart. I'm going to take apart the sea glass. Why not? So I've got the Edison Nouveau sea glass. I'm going to pull out the feed and I'll zoom in here for you. Forgive me if this is stuff that you already feel you know really well. You should just feel good about that if that is the case. So if you look closely at this feed, I'm going to see how closely I can zoom in and get away with it. Oh, look at that. So here's the feed. If you look, there's this very thin slit that goes down the middle of this feed. And there's all these different fins right here and all that stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this very thin one that goes all the way down and comes all the way to the end. You can see it right there. So if you're looking straight at the end, that slit is what is assisting in the capillary action. So the water goes through this very small channel. The ink channel is what that's called. And it naturally works its way up to here. And then it just kind of hangs out, and it'll fill in all this extra space in the fins, and it acts as kind of a reservoir. So as you're writing, if it needs to draw extra ink as you're writing more quickly, it draws it from this reservoir, and then when you stop writing, it kind of fills this back up. So it acts like a regulator. So it's not literally just drawing ink straight down through here. It's kind of filling up this whole extra space, and then it's just only got to grab it from right here. And then when that mates up to the back of the nib, then the nib assists in that capillary action through this slit in the nib tines. And that's how it works, my friends. That is how the capillary action works in a fountain pen. That's why they write upside down. That's why you can write with them in outer space. Oh, there's my face, my chin. How about that? There's that beautiful smile. So yeah, forgive me as I frame this properly here as I look at my monitor. All right, that's not bad. Cool. That's how it works. So what else did I have to say about that? That's pretty much it. That pretty much explains it all. So ink is mainly water. Water works by capillary action, and that's how it works in a fountain pen. You can look it up more if you want to research it. Capillary action is pretty well covered by the scientific world, and you can learn more about it there. All right, this next question is from YC2017 on Instagram. In last week's episode, you talked about how to polish the pen. I want to know more about how to keep the nib shiny too. My Platinum 3776 gold nib seems less golden than before. Ink is always sticking to the nib pattern of the Sailor Pro Gear. How do I keep the nib shiny as new? So when I mentioned polishing, and I've mentioned polishing a bunch of times before, there's a couple of different things you can use to kind of clean your stuff, your pen stuff. One is a microfiber cloth, and I keep a bright green one because I like to be able to find it easily. This has no polishing compound or anything in it, and it can just be used to clean the outside of a pen. I also use it to clean my computer monitor. Works really well for that. But you know, it can work on the outside of a pen. It doesn't necessarily polish any scratches away. It's really just for cleaning off dirt. It doesn't really do much for the nib in terms of what you're talking about here. What I use is a polishing cloth, a jeweler's cloth. And I'm considering, you know, I've talked about and thought about for years of like, you know, I should really carry my own. I just haven't sourced it out. So I'm currently investigating that right now so that I could offer small, you know, jeweler's polishing cloths for you all for cleaning, you know, your fountain pens and nibs and stuff like that. I think I just need to actually go ahead and do it. So I probably shouldn't say that I'm considering doing that because I'm kind of committing myself to it, but maybe I kind of need some external accountability to actually get on it. But anyway, so this is a polishing cloth. I just bought it at a jewelry store. You can get it at most jewelry and department stores. But the way that it works, it's a very soft cloth, and it has actually a polishing compound impregnated into the cloth. So as you are cleaning your whatever it is, you know, jewelry, as you would assume, really any type of metal, or it actually works pretty well on plastic too. It's not like going to take out deep scratches and stuff like that, but if you just got really fine micro scratches and just kind of want to polish it up, or if you have anything with silver trim especially works great, or really any kind of trim, metal trim, which would include your nib. You want to make sure that the nib is not wet, that you don't have ink in the pen, otherwise you're going to get your jewelry cloth all wet. But just a plain nib, and you just take and you just kind of polish it. You know, the thing that you want to be careful of is that you aren't getting little fuzzies all up in your nib. It's going to be kind of hard to not do that. So you're just going to want to be aware of it. So literally you just kind of polish it back and forth. You know, want to be careful not to like bend and twist the nib tines. So, you know, what I recommend is as you're down at the base of the nib, maybe I should zoom in a little bit. Here we go, woo! Zooming in and out a lot today. So as you're polishing kind of the base of the nib, this is assuming you don't want to take it out of the pen. You know, you just kind of go in small motions up and down, and then as you get towards the tip, don't go towards it and jam the tip like that. Just kind of, you know, you don't want to press down really firm, but really just kind of brush it lightly and just kind of go like that. So you're not actually going back and forth when you're towards the tip of the nib. Just kind of, you know, lightly go like that. And you'll have to do it a bunch of times depending on how, you know, dirty it is or whatever, but just do it like that. And I'm getting little fuzzies in here. That's just gonna happen. This is where a brass sheet would really come, I feel like I need to duck down. This is where a brass sheet would really come into play. But yeah, look at that, look how shiny that is. Bling, bling. And that's a new nib too, so you can even take something relatively new. I'm gonna see if I can get something like from scratch and actually polish it up here. Let me see. Oh, that wasn't my new one. That was my, okay, so I got the sea glass. Now see, that's a new one. Let me see my Mont Blanc here. Okay, that's not too bad. That's not too bad, but it's, you know, it's got some goobers on it. A little bit. Let me see if I can actually zoom in and get you something really good here. I need to shave, that's for sure. It's just got a little bit of goobers, and it's pretty shiny. You know, it's not too bad, but I'm gonna see if I can polish it up a little bit for you. Really get it looking nice. You know, in some jeweler's cloths like this one, this one is actually two-sided, so if I want to get more aggressive, I can go towards the other side. Aggressive being a very relative term. None of this is really that aggressive, but it probably doesn't take too much, especially if you're dealing with really shiny metal. Bling. Does that look any different to you? It's shinier, I can tell. But it'll help, especially if you have like really fine scratches on there. It'll just help to polish it up. And honestly, especially if you're dealing with, you know, dark, like flat colors like this, like on these plastics. I'm gonna see if, I don't know if I can get any fine scratches. You can see some fingerprints, but you can see a little bit of scratching right there. I can actually just take the jeweler's cloth, and because it's good for metal and plastic, you can actually just kind of rub it right over any trim rings or anything like this, and I find it to work pretty darn well. So you might have to do it a bunch to really get it to have an impact. But then when I show it, like in the light, does that look noticeably better to you there? So like there, that's where I polish it on. No? Yes? No? It looks shinier to me. It's hard to show it on the video like this, but anyway, little bit of work, not too bad. So, you know, that's pretty much the process. I don't know if there's other ways to do it. I don't think you need like harsh chemicals and stuff like that. If you got, you know, ink that's kind of sticking to it, a pen flush can help to clean that up. If you don't have a polishing cloth, certainly can help with that. But if you're dealing with like microfine scratches and stuff like that, polishing cloth is going to clean it up really nicely, whether it's a stainless steel nib, rhodium plated, gold. The nice thing is pretty much when you're talking about nibs or any trim or anything like that, it basically is like jewelry. It's precious metal, so you're going to be able to polish it up really nicely with that method. All right, this is from awmawy on Instagram. What is the future for the fountain pen market? Well, where do you see openings for the market to expand? For example, what types of pens aren't sold now but could be? Stuff like that. You said leave a tough question. Haha. Tough question? That's like 3 impossibly open-ended questions. I'm just kidding. I would have taken the question if it was really that bad. So it's kind of general. I'm just going to take this in whatever direction I feel like. So the future for the fountain pen market is always up in the air. As I say on a pretty regular basis, the fountain pen has been, for some people, functionally obsolete since the 1950s. Since the ballpoint was invented, you could argue that fountain pens don't really have to exist because as a purely, like, primarily functional writing instrument, they are no longer the primary go-to, and that's fine. I think they serve a very different purpose, just like you could argue that pretty much anything that exists serves some kind of purpose. I think that fountain pens are you know, kind of transitioning a little bit. I know that historically they've had their ups and downs. They've been around for a long time. You know, they're not the primary writing tool anymore, but for those of us, myself included, who are very passionate about writing and fountain pens and analog, you know, writing, there's no better tool, honestly. So I think that it just depends on who you are and what you're into and stuff like that. I think that with the technology being what it is right now, you could certainly argue like, okay, the technology is changing things and yada, 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 texting, voice activated stuff. We're going to have self-driving cars everywhere soon and yada, yada, yada. Do we really need fountain pens? I would say that, you know, there's probably like, you know, as you had in the early 1900s, fountain pens were huge. They were, you know, everything. And then as the ballpoint came out, they kind of just declined after that because they weren't the most functional, most practical, universal writing tool that was around. They never really died. They kind of hung around a little bit. They kind of maintained like a status appeal, especially in like the 80s and 90s. A lot of limited editions were coming out, very kind of status-driven stuff, and they were given a lot of gifts and things like that. Not as much of like the vibrant enthusiast community that you're seeing now. I think with the invention of the internet and, you know, just fountain pens not being as ubiquitous as what they once were, it's harder for people to just kind of be exposed to them, at least in the US here, that's how it is. They're not being used in schools and haven't for decades. So people that are even interested in fountain pens don't necessarily have the same access to them, except for things like this video, our website, a lot of other retailers' websites and forums and blogs and all kinds of great things that the internet has provided for us as an enthusiast community to come together. So I think, at least my observation, and if the Goulet Pen Company is any indication to back up what I'm going to say, is that with the rise of the internet and online communities and social media and people connecting with each other around this crazy passion that we have, I would say that has increased interest in fountain pens in general. Now, whether that's been universal everywhere in the world, I don't know. I've read various reports that I don't know necessarily how conclusive they are that say that fountain pens are on the rise worldwide. I think the US had a little slight dip last year. The rest of the world is seeing it. It's exploding in parts of Asia. China's got a big boom in it. So, you know, I'm not a global economist. I don't really know. I focus on kind of what I do. But I would say that certainly I have experienced a boom in interest in fountain pens through my efforts at the Goulet Pen Company. So I am very optimistic about where they are. I'm realistic that they're not going to take over and be the primary writing instrument of choice, primary communication method of choice. I know that that's not going to be the case. You're going to have all kinds of technology that's going to develop in that way. But, I would say there's a lot of other technologies like fax machines, for example, which I hate fax machines. I think they shouldn't exist. I refuse to put one in my business. So we've never had a fax machine here. It's this thing that's like, there's better technology than that right now. I don't know anybody who's got a passion for fax machines, but I'm sure there are people that do out there somewhere. But anyway, I don't know why I went to fax machines. I didn't even script that out in my notes. So in the future of the market, I would say it's going to remain very niche. It's going to remain very passion driven. I think the number of people that are going to discover the passion is going to increase with reach of social media, and people who are deeply engaged in the hobby are going to evangelize and tell more people about it. As to how great exactly, it's kind of hard to say. It's going to ebb and flow, and I'm sure it's going to change. But I think there's something about writing something down physically that's just different. Once you cross the chasm to go digital, I think there's going to be just a wake of death of digital technology that is going to just continually evolve. Because kind of once you go digital, it's like, I had a Palm Pilot in high school. I don't even know, is Palm Pilot still around? Maybe, but I think about like the earlier, like using Kodak as an example. They had some digital technology, and digital just came and wiped them off the map. And there's going to be things that just evolve and wipe out old technology. I don't know that digital is necessarily going to wipe out fountain pens, because they essentially weren't there to wipe out in the first place for what purpose they were being served. I think people who are deeply into digital, myself included, also enjoy getting deeply into analog like this. So I don't anticipate that it's going to go away or anything like that. I do think it's going to change, though. What I've seen, and it's interesting, I just had some offsite meetings with Rachel and my leadership team, and we were talking about some of kind of the trends and stuff that's going on. So I'll just crack open a little insight into kind of what we talked about and what my observations are. I'm kind of looking at like brands that we have really grown with, and brands that we have carried that have been really successful and that excite you guys and get a lot of interest, and brands that are declining, that are not only not growing with the Rated Goulet pens, not pushing us towards future growth, but are actually declining year over year, despite the fact that we have grown as a company. That's a huge indicator of, this is not healthy. And I'm not going to call out any specific brands, but I can generalize and say some of the things that I think are, influencing that. I think that a lot of it has to do with kind of that passion, the niches, so having things in like smaller batches, not mass produced stuff, exciting new innovative developments, whether it's materials, colors that haven't been available before, filling mechanisms, just interesting kind of innovative stuff. If it's the same stuff that you've seen, same model of pen for 25, 30 years, and it's just a slightly different color of it, okay, maybe. There's definitely some exceptions to that. There's some pens that like, Lamy 2000's been around for 50 years, should stay that way. There's definitely staple pens like that, but there's other pens that's like, if they're just tweaking a couple of different parts and coming out with a new model and calling it a new model, but it's basically the same thing as a different model, just in a slightly different gray. It's like, okay, come on. Let's get on with it here. So I think changing things on a regular basis is really important to fight the noise that's in the marketplace. A lot of what I'm seeing, even in like the ink world, and that's been interesting too, not even just talking specifically about pens, but ink world's exploded in the last several years. I would attribute, Noodler's, Private Reserve in their heyday, really kind of helping Diamine, really exploding in the last 10 years or so. A lot of these companies have kind of come about in the last probably 10, 15 years or so, that have just exploded the fountain pen ink market to the point now where you're seeing like major manufacturers coming out with a lot more vibrant inks. Think about J. Bond with the 1670 inks. That has been crazy. You see like, I know Monograppa is overhauling their whole ink line. Stipula is overhauling their whole ink line. So it's, Platinum coming out with the classics, the Iron Gall inks. you're seeing even pen makers who are traditionally very slow to change their ink, especially, are getting a little more adventurous and getting people excited. Pilot Iroshizuku was a good example. That line's been around for a little while now, but that really excited a lot. And then, so I think that's a really important part. I think coming out with, like smaller kind of independently crafted, brands with like a support local feel, kind of a story behind them. Thinking about like Edison, Karis Customs, Tactile Turns. Some of these brands, it's like, it's kind of a smaller, more local thing. They're not necessarily the ones changing the world because they are so small, but for sure I'm seeing more stuff that's like stuff coming off a Kickstarter and becoming popular and stuff like that. It's less of a barrier to entry in manufacturing now than it used to be. I think exotic materials, I think about specifically like Jonathan Brooks with Carolina Pen Company. It's got some cool materials, some resins that are really getting into some cool and kind of crazy experimental stuff. And I know he's working with others like Sean Newton and like, I don't know if he's collaborated a lot with Edison, but like there's a very similar kind of feel with a lot of these smaller guys. So they're, coming out with some innovative stuff there that pushes the envelope a little bit. I think that, getting into bespoke pens, the ability to personalize, I think specifically about like some of the pen show circuit guys like Sean and Brian Gray with Edison, they make stuff in like the signature lines where you can actually pick, different components of the pen and different colors and stuff like that, and you can kind of build it on your own. People like being able to have that option. I would like to see some new nib material options. I think that would be really cool. It's in some aspects, it's like stainless steel, gold. It works. They're stable. They're reliable. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think it would be neat to see some other innovations coming that way. I think the barrier to that is a little higher, especially as you get into some really modern materials that are out, and trying to make them into nibs. It's difficult to do that, especially at any kind of a scale. So doing it economically is going to be the biggest challenge. That's where you run into some interesting things in the fountain pen world, because it's big enough to be interesting, but it's still small enough where it's not like large companies can R&D millions and millions of dollars to come up with some new nib material because they can sell just gobs of pens. They would have to be, it's not exactly an industry that's on the rise so much that companies are willing to experiment and really push the envelope to a great degree. The ones who are pushing the envelope more are smaller companies like Noodlers and Twisby and stuff like that. Edison with some of their filling mechanisms, Conid, they're the ones that are doing the innovation at a very small scale. So larger companies, but you're going to pay more. You're going to pay more for that kind of innovative stuff. So it's cool to see that as an option, though. But I think new nib materials, like I think specifically, what is it called? Nitinol or nitinol. Nitinol, it's like a nickel titanium. So it's kind of a new hybrid blend of metal that's like very flexible, but also has great memory, especially when you get it wet. So I'd be very curious to see what could come of that. But again, that's a very expensive material, and I don't know that anyone is experimenting with that, but it would be kind of cool to see. Just like you've had a change in kind of, even just in stainless steel. I know stainless steel used to be like total crap compared to the gold nibs that were the standard for 100 years or so. But as gold really skyrocketed in price, it became worthwhile to invest more in better stainless steel alloys. And now stainless steel nibs are very reliable as a whole. So the difference between stainless steel and gold nibs is much more refined and much more negligible than it used to be decades ago, before stainless steel really jumped up in quality. So I would be curious to see if there would be any other, because I know there's innovation just exploding with nanotechnology and all these other things that scientists are discovering every day. It's going to take a while for some of that to trickle down in practicality to the fountain pen world. But even still, having like palladium nibs on the Visconti pens, titanium nibs, those are not widely available, but they are available. Titanium is not a brand new material, but it's relatively new in the scope of all of fountain pen history. So even seeing some of that is kind of cool. I think there could be some other materials that could come out that would be pretty sweet. I would love to see that. And then enhanced filling mechanism designs too. I alluded to Edison a little bit with their pump filler, the Menlo pump filler, and some of the other things that Brian Gray's played around with. One of the coolest ones that I just want to call out, and I'm super jealous because as a retailer, I would love to sell this brand, but they don't wholesale, they only sell direct. So free shout out to you, my friends in Belgium at Conid. So I'm going to show you this filling mechanism just because I think it's the coolest thing, and you're probably going to want to buy it. And I would just, go ahead and tell them I sent you and that give them some goodwill. But so it's custom made pen. Pretty sweet. This is Drew's pen, actually. It's not even mine, so I'm super jealous just of that. Steel nib pen, but that's not the coolest part. It's the filling mechanism. So what's so cool, this is called the bulk filler. And there's different sizes and versions and stuff you can get. But it's basically a piston filling pen, so you unscrew it, and you fill it up, just like a regular piston. Instead of being a screw piston, it's a pull piston. So you pull it up, fills the pen, right? That's cool. And then it has this little part, this little design, and they actually allude to it in the cap. So it's got this kind of interlocking logo in the cap. Well, if you look here on the way that it's designed, it has this little hook. And as it catches here, you twist it, right? And it's going to twist around and it's going to catch right there. As it catches there, it keeps the piston seal at the top, and it unscrews the rod from the piston seal, and that allows you to push the piston rod back down, and then you can seal it up. So it's kind of interesting. So it's kind of a blend between a piston fill and a vacuum fill. It doesn't actually fill, it sort of fills by vacuum, but it's not the traditional like pressure vacuum fill. So what it's doing is it's actually leaving the piston seal at the top, so you're getting a really high amount of ink capacity inside the pen because you're not taking up the back half of it with a screw piston mechanism. But at the same time, the rod is coming down and it's sealing up the bottom here just like you would a vacuum filling pen. So you can carry a large amount of ink that's not going to burp and leak and stuff like that. And it's got a little reservoir in here, so as you're writing with it, this reservoir goes down, it's clear so you can see when it's down, and then you just open this up and a little more ink down, close it down, and you keep on writing and you have a huge ink capacity. And I just think this is the coolest design. This is really innovative stuff. And I know there's very smart people out there. There's all kinds of technology where there could be some really cool filling mechanisms that come out like this that would really push the envelope a little bit. I think there's definitely a ton of technology in the fountain pen history already, and for the vast majority of fountain pen history, most of the technological innovations have probably already happened just because of the sheer amount of demand that there was for fountain pens back in the day. But certainly there could be demand for cool stuff like this. So I would love to see more stuff like that. And Conid, if you guys ever want to retail your pens in the United States, please give me a call because I'm just a fan. All right. Got a couple more questions for you. This is from Ramarolls9010 on Instagram. And they're asking, I'm very interested in Aurora pens, but they're way too expensive. The less expensive 14 karat nib is the Aurora Alpha. Are you familiar with it? Does it have a similar nib to the Optima? And what's the difference between the 88 Optima, Talentum, Alpha 14 karat nibs? So I don't have a vast amount of experience with the Alpha or the Talentum. I'm somewhat familiar with them. I've talked about them with our Aurora rep. Again, we are just getting into Aurora, and the opportunity for us to kind of kick it off with the flex nib was kind of too good of an opportunity to pass up. We got the Optima. The Optima has been doing pretty well. The Nebulosa is, a special edition, limited edition special pen that we wanted to carry, especially because of the purple. This is Rachel's pen, actually, that she was so kind enough to let me borrow for this video. But yes, you're right. The 88s and the even the Optimas do get up there in price. You're talking $450 or so, getting on up into the $700-800 for the Nebulosa. So it's definitely a commitment. They have some lower price ones like the Alpha and the Talentum. It's actually the same nibs. It's the same nibs. Now, you can get... It's hard to talk in generalities with this brand because they have a lot of different options, and especially historically, they've done a lot of different stuff. But there's really two different nibs, the 14 karat and the 18 karat nib. Now they have steel nibs on like the Ypsilon and stuff like that, but these four pens that you mentioned here, they all use the same nib system. But there are some of the pens like the 88 where you can get a 14 karat or an 18 karat nib, exact same nib system, but it's just a different gold content. But in all intents and purposes, it's the same nib because it feels and writes very similarly. It's just if you want 18 karat instead of 14, you can have that. So the way these nibs work is they are a screw-in system. So you're getting a nib housing unit. It's ebonite feed with a gold nib that screws in through this nib unit like this. But this is interchangeable between all 4 of these pens. They do actually offer some of the nib units separately, but they're very expensive. So I don't carry them. But they are interchangeable if that's anything that matters to you. So you know, just from what I was able to kind of gather up and research a little bit, since I don't have experience with the alpha and the talentum quite as much, the pen body and the filling mechanism itself are going to make the biggest difference in the price. The nib is going to be the same, so it's going to write very similarly. Of course, I could argue like the style of the pen, the weight and stuff like that can affect the way it writes, even if that is the same nib. So, you know, if you're using a heavier pen, it's going to feel differently writing than the exact same nib would feel on a lighter pen. But, you know, those are very fine-tuned kind of differences. So, you know, once you hit kind of a gold nib standard, just like I mentioned earlier, it's going to write the same. So that's, you know, if that's purely price and you're like, I want that gold nib, but I don't want to pay that much for an 88 Nebulosa, you can certainly go for one of these other two, and I think you'd be really happy. And in fact, the Talentum specifically is one that I've kind of had my eye on. The Alpha, I can look into that too, but if there is interest from you all for us to get into some of the other Aurora pens, for sure, let me know. That's something that I can explore. But the biggest notable difference in its function is going to be the filling mechanism. So the Talentum and the Alpha, you're talking about a cartridge converter pen instead of a piston pen like you have on the 88 and the Optima. So that's something, if that matters to you. You know, you're still getting a piston converter, screw type converter on the Aurora pens, and it's a pretty generous size converter as well. But still, if you really want that piston with the ink window and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to get that on those pens. And then instead of having the Aurora Lloyd, which is what they call their kind of custom blend material, it's part celluloid, part you know, acrylic resin. So it's going to get a blend. It's going to be a little more durable than just regular acrylic, a little more scratch resistant too. And they're going to be able to do some kind of cooler things, like, you know, with the materials and stuff on some of those. So that's how they go about it, and that's not uncommon. You know, Visconti has that with, you know, for example, their the Opera here. This is a blend of celluloid and acrylic. I know Omas was doing that too. I believe that's what makes the Mont Blanc precious resin so precious. Graphon Faber-Castell has that, so it's different. It's not just straight up, you know, acrylic plastic. It's a blend. It's a more expensive material to use with some better characteristics. So you're paying part premium material. You know, the Nebulosa, it's got the rose gold trim and yada yada yada. So some of that kind of stuff. Okay, that's part of the difference of what you're doing. And then, you know, I think that'll pretty much do it. I made one note here at the end, and I'm like, what is that? Oh yeah. Sorry. One other note. I was looking at my notes. I was like, what does that even mean? Okay. So of the 88, I'm still learning the Aurora line, but it's my understanding that there is a medium size 88 that's smaller than these ones, that is lower in price as well. So that is also a cartridge converter model. So that's another nuance to have distinguished there. So that could also be a method of lowering the price. So definitely some stuff to explore. I'm eager to learn the brand along with you, but that could certainly be something to investigate. And then I'm going to close out this week with a business question. So this is from arachnesthreads on Instagram. Arachnesthreads. What are the differences between the closeouts and sale items section in the shop? So this is talking about Goulet pens, I'm assuming. So yes, we have both closeouts and sale items. You know, that could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So I'll give you what our guideline is for that. So closeouts are things that are discontinued, that we're no longer going to carry in our store. We're getting rid of them, clearing them out. Everything must go. So usually what situation we are in, it's because of one of three things. It's either because we have decided to stop carrying it. It's a regularly available thing. It's fine. We're just not carrying it. Often that's due to slow sales. It could be because of a number of other reasons, but most often it's because it's just not selling very well and we need the warehouse space, or we don't want to tie up the cash in stuff that's not moving, or, we don't want to clutter up the site with things that you're not interested in buying anyway. It could be any number of things, but that's the first reason. Second one is it's still being manufactured, but it's not being brought into the US anymore. That happens sometimes. For example, I'm thinking about I don't know why this is the first one to pop into my mind, but the Pelican 4001 Blue Black series of ink, their regular ink, not the Edelstein, but the regular one. It had, I guess, kind of like an iron gall kind of chemical component to it that, was on the no-no list in the US in terms of chemical regulations. They didn't want to reformulate it, so they just stopped bringing it into the US. It's still made, you can still get it overseas, but it's not available in the US. We used to carry it, and blah, it's not available anymore. So that's where we're at. That kind of stuff can happen sometimes, or it could just be like, the product is a slow mover. We end up dealing with this a lot with like Exaclair, who imports all the Clairefontaine Rhodia products and stuff like that. I mean, the Clairefontaine catalog is like this thick. It's crazy how much stuff they have, and stuff that's like, you're like, oh my gosh, Clairefontaine, but it's not. They have wrapping paper and all kinds of just stuff. Clairefontaine in France is like Office Max here in the United States. You know what I mean? Like, they have a range of all different kinds of random stuff. It's not just like fountain pen friendly paper. That's a lot of what Exaclair, the US importer, has brought in and made Clairefontaine to be in the US. But there's all kinds of other random stuff that would just never sell here in the US under that brand. So, Exaclair is bringing stuff in all the time. If it doesn't sell very well just across the whole US, they'll stop carrying it. It's still being made, but we might have it on closeout because it's like, oh, this thing is being discontinued. Or, TWSBI might have a certain, color pen, and they're like, well, it's not available anymore. It's like, okay, well, we're going to put it in the closeout so that people know that it's not going to be available anymore. The other, excuse me. The other reason that could happen is if something's being discontinued altogether. It's just not going to be made anymore. That happens sometimes. The most most sad recent example of that would be Omos. The company folded and they're just not making anything anymore. So we had some Omos and it's like, boom, company's gone, no more stock. Okay, we're just going to put it on closeout. So there's some recent example there. With this type of stuff, the closeouts, we often try to discount it a little bit deeper, especially if it's something that has just not been moving for us. We want to incentivize it to just kind of, all right, let's get on with our lives here, clean break, close it out, get it out of here, and then it's off the site. That's kind of our approach. It's not always the case that we do that. Sometimes there's friendly rules about what we can advertise and what we can't and stuff like that. Usually it's a little more lax on products that are being discontinued, especially if it's like not being made anymore. It's like, well, okay, just sell it whatever you want and get out of there. If it's a regularly offered product that, all retailers are carrying and we just decide to discontinue something, it's generally not as cool if we are like deeply discounting it and stuff like that, just because it makes the brand look bad. So we try to be sensitive to that. And sometimes, honestly, it's like not even worth us dropping it because it's behind the scenes stuff that we have to do. If we have like one of a bottle of ink left, it's like, all right, we're just going to let it sell just kind of naturally because somebody's going to want it, and we'll just kind of decide to do that. But and then the other thing aside from just the pricing is we'll usually have like a separate return or exchange policy related to closeout items. Specifically, if it's like a brand that we're not even going to be carrying anymore, then we're kind of not having that relationship with that manufacturer anymore. Or if the manufacturer doesn't exist anymore, it complicates things a little bit. So we'll try to clarify what that looks like. The sale items portion on our site, it is regularly offered items that we are just trying to incentivize you to buy. So for one reason or another, temporarily. So it's something we're going to continue to offer. We're just temporarily dipping the price so you can move it along. There's really only a couple of reasons that we do this. We in general just are very kind of sale discount averse at Goulet Pens. I'm personally just like, I much prefer kind of more of the, let's just offer the best price that we regularly can and just kill it on service and educate the living daylights out of you. And then whenever you're comfortable and ready to buy, you know what you're going to get. I personally I don't love all the games with dipping prices up and down and left and right, because I know personally it's like, if I'm going to go buy something and then 2 days later I see that it's dipped down 20% in price, I feel like an idiot. I'm like, dang, that stinks. So I feel like I'm constantly having to hawk for prices, and sometimes that's worthwhile, and that's certainly a lot of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I personally just would rather, as a retailer, I'd rather focus on providing excellent quality and excellent service, and just a more stable experience than constantly like tugging and pulling at your heartstrings, dipping my price left and right. So I usually don't play that game a lot. There will be times when I do. Oftentimes, if it's like we're really overstocked on something and trying to move it, specifically if we have, a slower time of year, we might do an ink sample sale. We'll do that usually about once a year. If we get really slow in the summertime, maybe, it's not like a given that we're going to do it, but we might kind of gear up for that and be like, all right, to try to keep our team fully staffed and busy, we'll dip on something like that, and just to try to generate some motion there, and it gets something exciting for you guys. Or we might do a Jinhao, like buy one, get one, a BOGO. We'll do that every now and then. Or we might have sales just to kind of keep some activity moving in times where, there's a lot of seasonality and things like that, because we have a staff that we try to keep busy year round, and there is some fluctuation. It's not as bad as some other businesses for us, but that may be a reason why we choose to do it. But even still, we got to be careful about that, depending on the brands and agreements we have with certain companies. So it could be that. It could also be just overstock. We have way too much of something, and we want to free up the cash so that we can do something else in the business. So we'll put something on sale, get it down to a manageable level, and then take it off sale. That kind of stuff happens all the time in businesses. It's really just good business doing that. So it might not be anything related to demand, but we just have too much supply, so trying to increase it a little bit. And then just sometimes there's special promotions, stuff that's offered by the manufacturer, especially in the holidays. They might say something like, hey, we really want you guys to, introduce this new line, or, what if you were to buy a certain amount that might be larger than normal for you, but we'll include a free bottle of ink with it, and you can do a gift with purchase kind of thing. That's where business can get fun and interesting on the back end, is like, okay, what kind of stuff could we do here? That kind of stuff doesn't come up a lot, but it is certainly something, or we may choose to do that ourselves, as opposed to dropping the price on something. We could do a gift with purchase, and then it might be a sale item on the package or something like that. We'll do that kind of stuff sometimes, but really just trying to keep things fun and interesting for you guys. But for these two specific things, hopefully that gives you some idea. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but giving you some separation between what is a closeout and what is a sale item. I will say, I kind of talked to Rachel. Rachel manages most of the logistics, the back end of the website. And I kind of asked her, I was like, don't we have closeout items in the sale items? She's like, yeah, we do. We used to have them all completely separated, no overlap between the two. Over time, we decided to put some of the closeout items in the sale items, really just to kind of get more awareness for them. Not having different prices or anything like that, but just including some of the closeouts in the sale items ones. If that's confusing for you all, it's a relatively recent thing that we've been doing. If that's confusing at all, I'm very open to feedback on that, and we can easily kind of separate that out again and kind of keep it clearer. There's no hard, fast rules for this kind of stuff. So if that's the case, I'd love for you guys to let us know. That way I can do whatever seems to be making sense for you. All right, we've reached the end of Q&A for this week. My question of the week this week is just kind of a weird thing that I've dreamed up. So, if a pen genie were to come and grant you one wish for any pen that you could have, any pen at all, with the caveat that you could only look at it and never touch it, hold it, or write with it, what pen would it be? What a torturous question, isn't it? That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. You can check out a lot of what I talked about on Goulet pens. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you so much, and right on.